Hare Krishna, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Bhagavatam class. Today we begin with Canto 1, Chapter 16, Text 21. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, Arakshamana Striya Urvivalan Shochasyato Purushadari Vartan Vacham Deving Brahmakule Kukarmani Abramanye Rajakule Kulagriyan. So here Parikshit is questioning the bull. No, I'm sorry. Dharma in the form of a bull is questioning the cow. The bull represents Dharma and the cow represents the earth. So in asking these questions, actually, the bull of Dharma is revealing the symptoms of Kali Yuga, or all of the failings of a miserable society. So these questions give us really a list of all the things that are seriously wrong with our society. So the bull begins, Arakshamana Astriya Urvi Balan Shochasi. So Shochasi, the implied question is, do you lament, Shochasi, you lament for Striya, the women who are Arakshamana, who are not being protected. Literally is what it says. It's a passive present participle. Arakshamana, the women who are not being protected. Men, on average, have twice the upper body strength as women. Women have other strengths and other abilities that often men lack, but still, in terms of physical strength, men are much stronger. They tend to be twice as strong on average. So if you have one group that is physically much stronger, they're supposed to protect and not exploit those who are physically less strong. So here, if the women are not protected, as Arjuna pointed out, this is basically what Arjuna said in chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita. If the women are not protected, they will be exploited. They will end up in inappropriate unions with men. This will produce children who, according to modern science, this is not just ancient conservative, an ancient conservative religious idea. Modern science has shown that children that do not grow up in a proper home with a united mother and father are much more likely to commit suicide, to be economically poor, to commit antisocial acts, criminal acts, to end up in jail, and many other things. So this concern about women not being protected and therefore being exploited, which is a condemnation of men of bad character, this is a reason for suffering. It's a major reason for suffering on the earth. And that's the first question. Arakshamana Striya Urvi. Urvi means on the earth. Are you lamenting for the women who are not being protected, or Balan, the children? Because obviously, I mean, women generally raise children. That's the normal or most common way. And so if the women are not being protected, the children will be exploited also. So arakshamana striya urvi balan shochasi, or purushadari vartan. And because they're not being protected, the women and the children, they are being afflicted by or exploited by or suffering because of purushada, which literally means cannibals, man-eaters. Prabhupada translates it here, cannibals or rakshasas. So eating here is purusha ada. Purusha ada, which means ada means eating. This is related to the word anna, like say anamrita, pao, and so on. So eating in the Vedas is often used symbolically to mean in the sense that there are eaters and there are the eaten. There are the exploiters, those who exploit, those who take advantage of, and those who are exploited or taken advantage of. And so Purusha there here means not only literally man-eaters or cannibals, but also the women, the unprotected women and the children are being afflicted by, exploited by bad people. So we see this all over the world. This is not a mystery. You can see it everywhere. So another question, in other words, asking, is this the cause of your suffering? And in doing so, enumerating all of the worst features of Kali Yuga, Vachan Deving, Brahma Kule Kukarmani. Are you lamenting for the speech goddess, Saraswati, or simply Vak, or Vach, speech? Because speech is very powerful. Ultimately, by speech, people enlighten, they threaten, they make threats, they intimidate, they comfort. So speech really, if you even see how cruel dictators take power, it's because by their speech, they convince other people to join them and commit violence on the innocent. And so speech really makes the world go round. Everything is moving in this world because of speech. And so if speech is protected, which means that just like in a normal country, you cannot say something which is, say, slanderous, or to give the common example, if you're in a crowded place like a stadium or a theater, you cannot knowingly falsely yell, there's a fire, which will cause people to stampede and people will be killed and trampled. So there are limits to speech. And speech is supposed to be under the protection of the Brahmanas, because the Brahmin class, the teachers, the religious leaders, spiritual leaders, they are the caretakers of honest, good speech. And of course, they're supposed to be the best speakers because they're the most intelligent, the most clever. So speech is supposed to be under the protection of the Brahmins. And here, the bull says, Brahmakule Kukarmani, are you lamenting for the speech goddess who now is in the Brahmakule, the Brahmana community, but a particular Brahmana community that is Kukarmani, that engages in evil acts or bad actions. They do bad things. And so rather than the goddess speech being under the care of pure-hearted Brahmins, now, and you see that, the so-called, where there's no better place to look than the modern Western universities, which tend to be highly, tilted toward or under the control of scholars who are atheists, who ridicule religion, who want to tear down society. It's interesting. Karl Marx, one of my absolute favorites. He saw that perhaps the two major obstacles to the revolution he wanted, the two major obstacles were the family and religion, because people who are attached to religion do not want to necessarily go out on the street and start killing other people who actually are seriously pious. And family, when people, men and women, are attached to their family, to their children, they don't want to put their children in danger. And so part of the leftist program, which you can still see today in the universities, is to tear down religion and to ridicule the idea of a faithful marriage. Like, so many of these so-called scholars ridicule the idea that there's something particularly pious or virtuous or important, necessary in a faithful marriage. And the idea that illicit sex, just having sex here and there, if there's anything wrong with that, it's just insufferable, an insufferable abrogation of our natural rights to be animals, to be lusty animals. So you can see it. You can see it in Marx. You can see it, and so speech. In other words, the speech of the intellectuals, the speech of the scholars, is literally now in Kukarmani, Brahmakule Kukarmani. It has now been trapped in communities that do everything possible to destroy decency and God consciousness. Not all of them, but many of them. And the ones who may not feel that way are intimidated and wouldn't dare to challenge the demonic scholars for fear of being humiliated or even losing their jobs. So Parikshit, the bull is asking the cow, the Dharma is asking the earth, are you lamenting for the speech goddess who now finds herself in the communities of Brahmins who engage in evil deeds? So Abramanye Rajukule Kulagriyam, or are you lamenting for the Kulagriyan, which means the highest of communities, which is the Brahmin community, which itself now is in the community of kings who are against the Brahmins. And so this is kind of explaining what does it mean that the Brahmakule, that speech herself, the goddess speech, is under the control of Brahmanas who engage in evil acts, and the Brahmins in general are somehow trapped in governments or have to work under governments which are against Brahminical principles. Because Raja Kule, the royal community, in modern terms, it simply means government, the ruling powers. And so that Kula, that community, which is supposed to be Agriya, the highest community, is now under the control of governments that oppose Brahminical principles. So these descriptions of Kali Yuga are quite accurate. We can see them everywhere in our own society. So now we'll go to the next verse. King Kshatrava Bandhun Kalinopas Prishtan Rashtrani Vatara Varopitani. So, is it that, like, Kim introducing the question, like, is this the cause of your suffering? In other words, are you lamenting? Are you lamenting for the Kshatriya Bandhun? Again, as Prabhupada always explained, the Kshatriya friends. In other words, people who are born in Kshatriya families but are not really qualified, and so therefore they're politely called the friends of Kshatriyas. And so Kalina, by Kali, Upasrishtan, which means either they're being afflicted by Kali or they've been unleashed. They've been unleashed on human society by Kali. And or Vamis, or are you lamenting for Rashtrani, the kingdoms or the countries that tire by those unqualified leaders, avaropitani, are dragged down, are being taken down. So the whole society is being taken down by these unqualified leaders who have been unleashed on the world by Kali Yuga. And then another symptom of Kali Yuga, which we can see, itas tato, which literally means from here, from there, or here and there, which is a way of saying everywhere. Itas tato va, or is it that ashana pana vasa snana vivayon mukha jiva lokam? Is it that, are you lamenting for the jiva loka, human society, in which people are unmukha, they're enthusiastic or inclined? Unmukha literally means to put your face up towards something, to lift your face toward. Unmukha. Un means up, ud, and then mukha means face. So literally lifting your face towards something, which unmukha. And then vimukha, the opposite, means one is downcast. But unmukha in the Sanskrit dictionary means raising the face. That's literally looking up or at. And it means also like you're looking up, you're waiting for, expecting something, or you're enthusiastic about something, you're looking forward to something. So here, the idea is that the Jiva Loka, people in this world today, are unmukha. They are, Prabhupada said, inclined, which is an excellent translation. They're inclined toward ashana, eating, drinking, vasa, dressing, snana, bathing, vivaya, sex, but itas tato, like anywhere and everywhere. So it's not that, people sit down together in a civilized way and offer thanks to God and then respectfully eat. No. Now they have food courts. People just walk around eating. Eating has become very informal. So and so in that very, very informal way of eating, people are not inclined to remember that their food is a gift, to say grace, to thank God for their food, to eat respectfully, to eat the right things, just anywhere and everywhere. People eat, prana, or drink. Vasa, they just, they dress themselves in any which way. It's the age of slobbery, people. And snana, bathing. Again, there's no bathing anywhere. Vibhaya, sex. So the idea is that people are just do whatever they want with their bodies anywhere they want to do it, and any let's say formality or how should I put it? Not shyness, but modesty. Modesty or propriety or doing the right thing in the right place. Some things should be done in private. The formalities, which are not simply silly, but often formalities bring us to a proper state of consciousness, because a formality literally gives form to something. It gives structure to it. And so the modern life is just, it's wild. It's wild. And formality, the form of things, has been lost. People do not associate their basic bodily activities with God. They're just running around, to use an old term, helter-skelter. So that's another symptom of Kali Yuga. And then finally, in a sense, the real cause of all these troubles, Yadva, or is it Amba, mother or lady, good lady, Te Bhuri Bharavatara Kritavatara. This is very poetic Sanskrit. Kritavatarasya Harer Dharitri Antarhitasya Smarati Visrishta Karmani Nirvana Vilambitani. So is it that, this is a very sort of ornate, sophisticated syntax, the way the words are, but to put it in simple Sanskrit or simple English, the idea is, it's understood, are you lamenting that, is it that you are remembering, smarati, is it that you are remembering that you have now been visirsta, abandoned, or nirvana vilambitani, are you remembering, now that you've been left by Krishna, are you remembering karmani, his activities, which are nirvana vilambitani, which bring about liberation? Nirvana vilambitani, and vilambitani just means that they bring this about, they're connected to it. Vilambitani obviously refers to the activities of Krishna. Depending on. So, is it that you are now remembering the activities, nirvani, the activities which upon which our salvation depends? Are you remembering those activities upon which our liberation, our nirvana depends? Those activities of Harer, who avatarasya, who descended, who came as an avatar in order to carry out the bringing down of the burden of the earth. So avatara can mean crossing down. The Lord comes down to this world. It can also mean bringing down. So the word avatar is used twice in this sort of very interesting literary compound. Bhuri vara. Bhuri means abundant or heavy. Bhuri vara, the heavy load, the heavy burden. Avatara, to take down the heavy burden. It's like if you're carrying some very heavy thing on your back and someone comes and takes it off your back and says, well, I'll carry this. So taking down in order to bring down the heavy burden, Krishna enacted his avatar in which he comes down. And so are you remembering? And then Dharitri, O earth, it's addressed to the earth, and who's now antarhitasya, who's now vanished, who's now disappeared. Krishna's now disappeared. So are you remembering the activities of Hari, Krishna, those activities upon which we depend for liberation, activities which he enacted as an avatar which brought down the burden of the earth? So that's actually what it means, literally. And that Krishna, Hari, who has now disappeared. And so disappeared in Sanskrit, antarhita, literally means he has placed himself within. It's very interesting because Krishna is still present, but he's just gone within. He's now within and not externally visible. He's within his own spiritual space, which is more subtle than physical space, and therefore it's called within, antarhita. Anyway, this is the common word for disappearing, antardhana, antarhita, and so on. So ultimately lamenting, the earth is lamenting that Krishna has now gone, and the earth is remembering how Krishna took away all the troubles of the earth, and by doing that, facilitated our liberation for all of us. So, idang mama chakshva tavadi mulam vasundare jaina vikarshitasi kalena vate balinang baliyasa sudarchitam king hritam amba sobagam. So we'll do that next week. And I think I'll stop here and just take a look to see if there are any comments. I was just reminded to look for questions. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions and comments. Again, if you put question marks, then can see, oh, Jagat Palana. If protection of women is only physical, this would imply that Arjuna feared women would be raped. No, it's not only physical. Women are not just animals that you just physically protect. Protection means to protect another person, and women in many ways protect men. Protection simply means to protect someone from anything that will seriously harm them. And so, for example, receiving bad advice or being seduced, which happens, men seduce women, women seduce men. So protection is to protect a person from anything that will cause them significant harm. And so that's what it means. We also hear that women need to be protected because they're like young teenagers with little self-control and psychophysically not self-sufficient. Well, glad we're not dealing with any controversial topics here. In the real world, men, sometimes good men protect women, and often women protect men. So I know many women who are not like young teenagers with little self-control. And I know many women who are intelligent and who are leaders and do all kinds of amazing devotional service. And someone could say, okay, well, that's only among devotees, but not really. I mean, in the material world, there are women who lead huge corporations, who are, leaders of countries and so on. So women like men are different. Some women are helpless and some men are helpless, and some women are capable of doing amazing things and some men are. So what I would recommend is that we treat people personally, that if men who deal with women or women who deal with women, everyone should be understood according to their real nature. See that effulgence coming upon me? Anyway, so the women, I work with many women, and I know many women, and I try to understand them on a personal, individual basis, and then deal with them accordingly, appropriately, rather than applying to them a sort of a categorical analysis, which, like the one just given here, in many cases would simply not be accurate and would lead me to treat women inappropriately in a way which is harmful to them and therefore harmful to society. Let's see if there's anything else. In current times, is it best to increase free speech or introduce some cancel culture? That's a very interesting question. Is it best to increase free speech or introduce some cancel culture? I believe that speech should be intelligent and reasonable and accurate. And so the real enemy of humanity is not just the left or the right, but fanaticism, extremism. And we know for a fact, it's anyone that has even a little bit of common sense knows this, and it's even neurologically verified, that it's like the bell curve, that there are some people, there are fanatics on the left and there are fanatics on the right. And they are the real danger to society. Whereas people who are sort of moderate and reasonable can see both sides and can come to balanced conclusions. So, the real problem is extremists, fanatics, and so on. Oh, there's Havi. Hare Krishna, my old friend Havi. So, Leelakar. It's self-evident that when Srila Prabhupada was writing these purports, he was way ahead of his time. How did these realizations come to him? To be fair, the let's say, the critique of modernity, seeing that many new things were happening or becoming established in society that were not healthy and not good for people. This is something that many thinkers in the West were pointing out for a very long time. If we look at history, let's say Western history, and even if we say let's look at Western intellectual history, like the history of what people thought, what thinkers thought, there have always been conservatives. There have always been people who were, you could say, pious or religious, and who very clearly saw the degrading effects of modernity. I mean, some modern things are good. For example, in the modern world, we can propagate Krishna consciousness publicly, which we could not do in more conservative times in the West. So sometimes, unfortunately, things have to open up indiscriminately in order for the devotees to get through the door. And, you could say, well, why didn't people in the West just say, okay, you can preach Krishna consciousness, but in other things, we're going to be very conservative, because that's just not the way the real world is. It's just not the way the real world is. It's highly unrealistic. And so therefore, in a sense, everything is opened up. So all the garbage came in, but also Krishna consciousness came in. So now that Krishna consciousness is established, the real hope is the Brahmins, that we have to be reasonable, and we have to teach people to be reasonable and balanced and to understand what is ultimately important. So again, Prabhupada saw these things, but if we're going to be historically accurate here, there were many, many thinkers in the world who also saw these things. So Jagoranga does. How can we understand the controversial statement that women are less intelligent? Prabhupada was not against science, and Prabhupada would adjust his opinions as he received scientific information. So ultimately, how should we think? I think we should think that as devotees, we should accept things that are objectively shown to be true, and that Prabhupada would also accept things if they could be demonstrated to Prabhupada that they were objectively true. And when Prabhupada was here and making statements like this, there were not devotees who were presenting information to Prabhupada. And when reliable information was presented to Prabhupada, he would tend to adjust his statements. This is on material things. Obviously, on spiritual things, there's nothing to adjust. So another question from Jagoranga. I see that in Brazil, many devotees fight over political views and for or against some political figure. How can we see Krishna in politics? The problem is, frankly, that even among devotees, there are people who tend to be a little too passionate and come to extremist conclusions. Again, the problem, whether it's among devotees or non-devotees, is extremism and sort of being half educated in a particular subject. People who, let's say, know more, I think, can come to reasonable conclusions. They can come to reasonable conclusions. So in, let's say, left-wing and right-wing extremism, there are many problems. And devotees should be balanced, see the problems on both sides, see whatever good there is on whatever side, and then come to a reasonable conclusion that is in line with Shastra. As I've said before, we're supposed to be following our own Krishna conscious philosophy as presented by the Lord Krishna, by Lord Chaitanya, by Prabhupada, by the Shastras. And our Shastras, like Bhagavatam and Gita, include political philosophy. So our duty is not to jump on the bandwagon of this or that sectarian or fanatical political movement, but to rather teach as Brahmins the political philosophy found in our own shastras. And if we're doing that, then it's very easy to see Krishna there. So, Brindavanath Das, can you speak a bit about the interplay of culture and spiritual advancement? With the continuing moving needle of culture, often changing, degrading quickly, where shall devotees place their connections, affiliations to support advancement? We can't rely on culture to support a bhakti lifestyle. Well, for example, before we eat, we offer our food. And that kind of puts the brakes on gluttony, or hopefully, or just, being like an animal, like I'm starved, I'm hungry, and just feeding your face. If you have to stop, if you have to offer to Krishna, if you can only eat certain things, then those things protect us from just sort of animalistic eating. And as far as the moving needle of culture, it's an interesting image there. We have our own culture. We have to adjust to some extent because the way the modern world is, but we are meant to and we have to make a real clear distinction here between ethnic details and culture. Culture means, for example, that you offer your food to Krishna, and you offer to Krishna certain foods in the mode of goodness. It doesn't mean that you have to cook, let's say, with Indian recipes, or it just means that you eat food. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita talks about food in the three modes of nature. He doesn't mention any particular ethnic or regional cuisine. He just talks about the food in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And of course, a lot of food, which a lot of devotees think is Vedic, is not even in the mode of goodness. So therefore, Krishna does give us cultural standards, and ultimately the Brahmins are supposed to be in the mode of goodness. They're supposed to teach the mode of goodness and build and protect in society a culture in goodness. So I think that's the point there. So another question here. Srila Prabhupada often quoted Manu Samhita to argue that women should always be protected by the father, husband, etc. What role does Manu Samhita play among Vaishnavas? First of all, the Manu Samhita, whatever it was originally, is now a very corrupted text. It has some really awful things, like if a woman is unchaste, she should be thrown to wild dogs and just eaten alive. So there's a lot of stuff in the Manu Samhita that's available to us today, which is extremely problematic. And so in its present form, which pretty much there's widespread agreement is it's a corrupted text, it'd be very problematic to implement in human society. Women should always be protected, yes, and older people should always be protected. Like my body is a certain age, I'm not gonna, I don't carry a gun, and I'm not gonna, get in a street fight with someone. So, who in the world would not want to be protected? And so as far as women, we know in many cases women protect men by, protecting them from degradation. And so again, women should be protected, and men should be protected also. In terms of how you protect women and how you protect men, it should be done in a personal way according to the needs of the person. People should not be underprotected or overprotected. And so based on the character, the nature, the abilities of each person, we should protect them in a way that's appropriate so that we don't underprotect them or overprotect them. And people who are actually self-reliant should not be forced into dependence, which is beyond their actual need. So, for example, the police are meant to protect the citizens, but it doesn't mean I have a policeman at my door or a policeman living in my house. And so, what does it mean to protect someone? How much protection does a particular person need? This all has to be done very intelligently, not foolishly. So, Sankarshana, nowadays people tend to favor separation of state and religion. Do you think we can still have good government based on non-sectarian moral principles without tying these to specific religious or spiritual worldviews? First of all, the reason that state and religion were separated is because you had these bad religions that were just harassing people, even killing people, innocent people, in the name of religion. So we can say that, yeah, separation of state and religion, not Vedic, but you have to know the history. You have to know why that came about and what the dangers are. Can we still have good government and non-sectarian? I mean, basically, every moral principle is religious or metaphysical. For example, if you say you can't rape or kill, that's a moral judgment. Some people who are probably among the least intelligent people currently walking on the face of the earth say things like, you can't impose your moral values on others. Well, if we can't impose our moral values, then how can you have a law against murder? After all, to say that it's a crime to kill somebody, that's a moral judgment. If you say that it's a crime to rape someone, that's a moral judgment. I'm not saying it's a false judgment. It's a correct moral judgment, but it is a moral judgment. So if we're not going to impose our moral views on others, we can't have any laws at all. But then there's still a problem, because the idea that we shouldn't impose on others is itself a moral judgment. So if you say we shouldn't impose moral judgments, that is a moral judgment. And so therefore, it turns out to be the case that it is actually impossible. It is impossible not to impose moral judgments, because by nature, people tend to live in communities and societies, and they tend to make rules. And if you say no rules, that's a moral judgment. And if you have rules, that's a moral judgment. So therefore, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a human community that does not impose moral judgments. It doesn't exist, and it logically cannot exist. And therefore, people that say we shouldn't impose our moral views really need help. I mean, they really need help, because they are blind to the most obvious things in life. So the question is, which moral views? Democracy is the imposition of a moral judgment. After all, if we didn't impose any morals, it's just survival of the fittest, the law of the jungle. But even if you say we should have the law of the jungle, that's also a moral judgment. So, so first of all, we have to get clarity. First of all, we have to realize that there are people living among us who say incredibly unintelligent things, like that we shouldn't impose our moral views, and who have no idea what they're talking about. And the real issue here is, which moral rule should we impose? Because you cannot not impose moral views. So the first thing is that the whole issue has to be framed in a more reasonable way. So, okay, I think that's all the questions. If I missed anything, you can always sue me. Just kidding. So, thank you very much. Thank you all for listening. And I hope we'll see you again soon. Hare Krishna, like next Sunday.